The room went silent. It wasn't the respectful silence of a boardroom awaiting a vision. It was the suffocating, predatory silence of a pack watching a wounded animal. At the head of the mahogany table stood Julian Vane, the 32-year-old CEO of Vane Global, his face twisted into a smirk that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He held a single sheet of paper, my termination notice, and let it flutter onto the floor like a piece of trash. "Elias," Julian said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy that echoed off the glass walls, "you've been with us for 7 years. 7 years of being adequate. But Vane Global is a rocket ship, and we don't have room for ballast. You're a placeholder, a nobody who got lucky during the hiring freeze. To be honest, I'm doing you a favor. You don't belong in a skyscraper. You belong in a cubicle in the suburbs, counting paper clips until you retire or disappear, whichever comes first." I looked down at the paper on the floor. My hands didn't shake. I didn't beg. I simply looked at the men and women I had worked alongside, people whose careers I had saved with late-night audits and restructured debt models. They all looked away. Julian's ego was the sun, and they were all afraid of getting burned. "Is there a problem, Elias?" Julian leaned in, his expensive cologne smelling of arrogance and betrayal. "Or are you waiting for a severance package? Because there isn't one. You're being fired for gross incompetence. I've already sent the company-wide email. By the time you reach the lobby, everyone will know you're a fraud." I slowly met his gaze. I had spent years being the quietest man in the room, the one who took the notes while Julian took the credit. He thought my silence was weakness. He thought my humility was a lack of ambition. He had no idea that for 7 years I hadn't just been working for him, I had been studying him. "I understand, Julian," I said, my voice calm, almost hollow. "I'll clear out my desk." "Good. And Elias," Julian chuckled as I turned toward the door, "don't bother looking for work in this city. I'll make sure your name is synonymous with failure. You'll never be anything more than the dirt under my Italian shoes." I walked out of the boardroom, the heavy double doors clicking shut behind me. As I walked through the open-plan office, I could feel the stares. My colleagues, the ones I'd mentored, were suddenly very busy looking at their monitors. The failure email had clearly landed. But as I reached my desk and picked up my coat, my hand brushed against the small, cold weight of a flash drive in my pocket. Julian thought he was cutting off the ballast. He didn't realize he had just cut the line to his own anchor. As the security guard approached to escort me out, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The audit is complete. The trap is set." I looked back at the CEO's office one last time. Julian was laughing, clinking a glass of scotch with his VP. He thought this was the end of my story. He had no idea it was only the prologue. But as the elevator doors began to close, I saw someone I didn't expect standing in the lobby. Julian's father's old attorney, holding a sealed black envelope. I walked out of the Vane Global Tower with nothing but a cardboard box and the clothes on my back. To the world, I was a disgraced middle manager. To Julian Vane, I was a ghost. But ghosts have a way of seeing things the living prefer to keep buried. For 7 years, I was the quiet one. I was the man who stayed until 11 p.m. fixing Julian's creative accounting errors. I was the one who knew that Julian's lavish lifestyle wasn't funded by his salary, but by a series of high-interest loans leveraged against the very building we worked in. Julian saw me as a tool, a replaceable gear in his machine. He never stopped to ask why I never complained about the low pay or the missed promotions. The truth was, I didn't need his money. I was waiting for his mistakes. Growing up, my grandfather always said, "The loudest man in the room is the one with the most to lose. The quietest man is the one who already owns the room." My grandfather had been a founding partner of the firm Julian's father eventually took over. When he passed, he didn't leave me a fortune in cash. He left me a series of hidden clauses in the original corporate charter and a deed paper to a land trust that Julian didn't even know existed. I sat in my small, sparse apartment, the blue light of my laptop reflecting in my glasses. I plugged in the flash drive. On it were years of recorded meetings, Julian admitting to bypassing safety regulations, Julian laughing about bleeding the company dry before the merger, and Julian signing documents he hadn't actually read. Julian thought I was adequate. He didn't realize I was the architect of his current reality. I had purposefully steered him toward the Nexus project, a massive expansion that required him to put the Vane Global building up as collateral. I knew Julian's greed would make him skip the due diligence. I knew he wouldn't check who actually held the primary lien on the property. My phone rang. It was Marcus, the attorney I had seen in the lobby. "Elias," his voice gravelly and serious. "The board of directors is panicking. The accidentally leaked to the press about Julian's mismanagement email has dropped the stock price by 12% in 2 hours." "Everything is going according to plan, Marcus," I replied, watching the ticker on my screen. "He's going to come after you, Elias. He's already calling his fixers to frame you for the data leak. He wants you in handcuffs by morning." "Let him try," I said, a cold smile finally touching my lips. "He thinks he's playing chess, but he doesn't even realize I'm the one who built the board." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through my apartment. My front door was kicked open, and 2 police officers stepped in, followed by Julian's grinning head of security.
"Elias Thorne, you're under arrest for corporate espionage and theft of proprietary data," the officer barked, reaching for his handcuffs. Julian's head of security, a brute named Miller, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "Told you, Elias, Julian doesn't like loose ends. You should have just taken your box and disappeared. Now you're going to a cell." I didn't move. I didn't resist. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "If you check my bag, you'll find a sealed envelope addressed to the district attorney. It contains a full disclosure of Vane Global's offshore accounts that Mr. Miller here has been using to launder money for the CEO." Miller's smirk vanished. The officers paused. I gestured toward the envelope on my kitchen table. "I'm not the thief. I'm the whistleblower. And under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, any attempt to arrest me on trumped-up charges during an active federal investigation will be considered witness intimidation." The officers looked at each other, then at the envelope. They weren't Julian's puppets, they were just doing their jobs, and when a suspect starts quoting federal law and pointing toward evidence of a larger crime, the script changes. "Check the envelope," one officer told the other. As they examined the documents, meticulously organized email chain backups and accountant ledgers I had spent years compiling, Miller's face turned a ghostly shade of white. He reached for his radio, likely to warn Julian, but I beat him to it. "I wouldn't do that, Miller. If you warn him, you're an accessory after the fact. If you stay quiet and cooperate, maybe the DA will look kindly on you." The police didn't arrest me that night. Instead, they took the envelope and escorted Miller out in cuffs for questioning regarding the offshore accounts. I stood by my window, watching the sirens fade into the distance. Julian had tried to use the law as a weapon to crush a nobody. He didn't realize that the law is a double-edged sword, and I had been sharpening it for a decade. The next morning, the news was wildfire. Vane Global CEO under investigation for embezzlement. The stock didn't just dip, it cratered. The board of directors called an emergency meeting to save the company from bankruptcy. They needed a miracle. They needed an investor with enough capital to buy out the debt and a clean reputation to restore faith. I put on my best suit, the one I had bought years ago and kept hidden in the back of my closet. I picked up a leather briefcase. Inside was the most important document of all, the right of first refusal clause from my grandfather's trust. I arrived at the Vane Global Tower, but the security guards blocked the entrance. "Mr. Vane gave strict orders," one said. "You're banned for life." I didn't argue with the guards. I simply pulled out a CCTV footage still from my briefcase. It showed the same 2 guards accepting a thick envelope of cash from Julian Vane just 2 nights ago. "You can block me," I whispered, "and I can hand this to the internal affairs officers waiting around the corner. Or you can step aside and pretend you didn't see me. Choose wisely. Julian's ship is sinking, and he won't save you." The guards exchanged a panicked look and stepped back. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like an ascent to a throne. When the doors opened, the chaos was palpable. Assistants were shredding documents, and board members were shouting over one another in the conference room. I walked in, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble. The room went silent. Julian was at the head of the table, his tie undone, his eyes red-shot. He looked like a man who had spent the night staring into the abyss. When he saw me, his face contorted with rage. "You! How dare you show your face here? Security, get this piece of trash out of my building." "It's not your building anymore, Julian," I said, my voice echoing with a newfound authority. "What are you talking about? My father built this company. I own the majority shares," Julian screamed, slamming his fist on the table. I turned to the board of directors. "Gentlemen, ladies, you are facing a total collapse. Julian has leveraged the company's assets against a fraudulent project. The bank is hours away from foreclosing on this very building, unless, of course, someone exercises the heritage clause in the original 1954 charter." The oldest board member, a woman named Eleanor, who had known my grandfather, leaned forward. "The heritage clause? That was supposed to be a myth. It requires a direct descendant of the founding partners to buy out the debt at par value." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a DNA test paper and a notarized hidden letter from my grandfather. I laid them on the table. My grandfather wasn't just a partner. He was the silent majority owner. Julian's father didn't buy him out. He managed the trust, a trust that, per Clause 12B, reverts to the heir if the current management commits a felony that devalues the firm by more than 30%. Julian grabbed the papers, his hands trembling. "This is fake. This is a forgery." "It's not, Julian," Marcus the lawyer said as he walked into the room behind me. "I've spent the last 48 hours verifying the documents with the High Court. Elias Thorne isn't just an employee you fired. He is the rightful owner of the land this building stands on." Julian looked at me, the realization finally hitting him like a physical blow. But then he laughed. "Ownership? You? You're broke, Elias. You don't have the $500 million needed to settle the debt. Ownership is a theory. Cash is reality." Julian's laugh was desperate, a jagged sound that filled the room. The board members looked from him to me, their hope fading. "He's right, Elias," Eleanor sighed. "The clause exists, but without the capital to clear the lien by 5 p.m. today, the bank takes everything. The building, the company, the legacy. It all goes to auction." I looked at Julian. He was leaning back now, trying to regain his smug composure. He thought he had found the one wall I couldn't climb: money. "Julian," I said softly, "you spent 7 years watching me work, but you never once watched what I did with my time outside these walls. You thought I was living in a studio apartment because I was poor. I was living there because I was investing." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket, a different one this time. I plugged it into the boardroom projector. A series of bank statements and investment portfolios appeared on the screen. 7 years ago, I started a private equity firm called Aegis Holdings. I used my grandfather's initial inheritance, which you thought was just a few $1,000s, and applied the debt restructuring models I built for Vane Global. While you were buying yachts and racing cars, I was buying distressed debt. I was shorting the very companies you were trying to merge with. I knew your failures before you even committed them. The screen showed the bottom line of Aegis Holdings. The total liquid assets were well over $600 million. "I didn't just come here to claim my heritage, Julian," I said, stepping closer to him. "I came here to settle the debt. Aegis Holdings has already purchased the bank's lien. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the primary creditor of Vane Global." The silence this time was absolute. It was the silence of a kingdom changing hands. Julian's face went from pale to a sickly gray. You've been planning this since the day I hired you?" "No," I corrected him. "I planned to be a loyal employee. I planned to help you grow.
but the day you mocked my grandfather's memory and told me I'd never be anything, I decided to show you exactly what a nobody could do." "You can't do this!" Julian lunged across the table, trying to grab the documents, but Marcus stepped in his way. "It's already done, Julian," Marcus said. "The board has no choice. Either they accept Elias's buyout and save their shares, or they let you take them down into bankruptcy. What's it going to be, everyone?" One by one, the board members stood up and moved to my side of the table. Julian was left sitting alone at the head of a table that no longer belonged to him. But Julian wasn't finished. He pulled a small remote from his pocket. "You think you won? If I can't have this company, nobody can. I've already initiated a wiper protocol on the main servers. 10 seconds and every piece of data, every contract, and every cent in our digital accounts disappears." The board members gasped. The wiper protocol was a failsafe Julian had bragged about for years, a scorched earth policy in case of a hostile takeover. On the wall-mounted monitors, a countdown appeared. 09, 08, 07. "Julian, stop!" Eleanor screamed. "You'll go to prison for life." "I'm already going to prison," Julian yelled, his eyes wide with mania. "But I'm taking Elias's heritage with me. See you in the breadline, Elias." 04, 03, 02. The countdown hit 0. The screens flickered. A giant logo appeared on every monitor in the building. It wasn't the Vane Global logo. It was a simple, elegant A for Aegis Holdings. The wiper didn't delete anything. Instead, a message appeared. "Encryption successful. All data migrated to Aegis Secure Cloud." I looked at Julian, who was clicking the remote frantically, his face twisted in disbelief. "What? Why isn't it working? Delete! Delete everything!" "I wrote the code for that failsafe, Julian. 4 years ago. You told me to make it a kill switch. I made it a transfer switch instead. I knew eventually your ego would make you try to destroy what you couldn't control. I just made sure that when you pulled the trigger, the bullet hit the target I chose." Julian collapsed back into his chair, the remote falling from his hand. He looked small. For the first time, the giant of industry looked exactly what he was, a bully who had run out of people to push around. "There's one more thing," I said, turning to the board. "The heritage clause doesn't just give me the right to buy the debt. There is a hidden second page to my grandfather's original agreement with the Vane family. Marcus?" Marcus stepped forward and opened a leather-bound ledger. "The agreement states that in the event of a moral turpitude violation by the Vane lineage, the Vane family forfeits all personal assets tied to the company, including the Vane family estate and the private accounts Julian has been using." Julian's head snapped up. "What? No, that's my house. Those are my personal savings." "Not anymore. They were used as secondary collateral for the loans I now own. You're not just fired, you're bankrupt. You'll be leaving this building with exactly what you gave me, a cardboard box and a failure notice." The doors to the boardroom opened, and this time it wasn't security, it was the FBI. "Julian Vane, you are arrested for wire fraud, embezzlement, and attempted destruction of evidence." As the FBI led Julian away in handcuffs, he screamed obscenities, promising he would burn me to the ground. The board members were silent, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. They realized that the man they had ignored for 7 years was more dangerous than the man they had feared. "Elias," Eleanor said, her voice trembling, "what happens now?" "Now," I said, "we clean house. I want a full audit of every department. Anyone who helped Julian hide his crimes has 1 hour to resign. After that, I turn the evidence over to the authorities." I spent the next several hours in the CEO's office, my office. I didn't sit in Julian's chair. I sat on the edge of the desk, looking out at the city. It didn't feel like a victory yet. It felt like a responsibility. But the karma wasn't finished. Later that evening, Marcus walked in. "We have a problem. Julian's legal team is claiming that the DNA test paper you provided was a forgery. They're filing an emergency injunction to halt the takeover. They're claiming you're an imposter, Elias. They've even produced a witness, a woman who claims to be your real mother, saying you were adopted and have no blood tie to the founder." I frowned. My parents had passed away when I was young, but I had never been told I was adopted. "Who is she?" "Her name is Lydia Thorne. She's Julian's aunt. She's been in hiding for years. If she testifies that you aren't a heritage heir, the entire buyout is voided." I felt a cold chill. Julian had a backup plan. He was trying to frame my entire existence as a lie. If I wasn't a blood heir, the heritage clause was a scrap of paper, and I was just a former employee who had committed a very expensive corporate interference. "Where is she?" I asked. "She's at the courthouse right now, preparing to sign an affidavit." I grabbed my coat. "Get the old phone recording from the safe, Marcus. The old one from 1998, the one my father made before the accident." "Elias, if that recording doesn't say what we think it says exactly what it needs to," I said. "Julian thinks he can rewrite history. He forgets that I'm the one who kept the archives." As I rushed to the courthouse, a black SUV pulled up alongside my car, forcing me toward the guardrail of the bridge. Someone didn't want me to reach that hearing. The black SUV rammed my side door, the screech of metal on metal echoing over the river. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. Julian was behind bars, but his fixers were still active. This wasn't about law anymore. It was about survival. I slammed on my brakes, and the SUV overshot me. I shifted into reverse, swerved around them, and floored it. I wasn't a stunt driver, but I knew the layout of this city better than anyone. I took a sharp turn into a narrow alleyway that led toward the back entrance of the courthouse. I arrived at the court just as Lydia Thorne was stepping up to the witness stand. She was a frail-looking woman, dressed in expensive furs, looking every bit the grieving aunt who had been forced to come forward. "The man calling himself Elias Thorne is a fraud. He was a child we took in as a charity case. He has no vein blood. He is a thief trying to steal a family's legacy." The judge looked up as I burst through the doors. The room went silent. "Your Honor," I shouted, breathless but firm, "I have evidence that contradicts this testimony." The judge frowned. "Mr. Thorne, you are late. Mrs. Thorne has already provided a sworn statement." "I have a forensic ink test and a hidden letter from my father," I said, walking toward the bench. I handed the documents to the bailiff. The letter, dated 2 days before my father's accident, details how Lydia Thorne and Julian's father conspired to forge my adoption papers to prevent me from ever claiming the heritage clause. The ink on the adoption papers they've presented today, it's less than a year old. Lydia's face paled. She looked toward Julian's lawyer, who was suddenly very busy looking at his briefcase. "And," I added, "I have this." I pulled out an old phone recording, a microcassette from my father's old office. I pressed play on a portable recorder. "If anything happens to me, know that Elias is the true heir. Lydia and my brother have already tried to pay off the doctors to change his birth certificate. Don't let them take his name." The judge looked at Lydia, whose frail persona was crumbling into a mask of pure terror. "Lydia," the judge said, "perjury is a very serious crime, as is conspiracy to commit fraud." Lydia broke. "It was Julian. He told me he'd pay off my gambling debts if I just said the words. He said Elias would never find the original birth certificate." "I didn't have to find it," I said to her. "I never lost it. I just waited for you to lie about it."
With Lydia's confession, Julian's last-ditch effort to reclaim the company shattered. The judge immediately dismissed the injunction and ordered Lydia Thorne to be taken into custody for perjury. I walked out of the courtroom, feeling the weight of 7 years finally lifting. But as I reached the steps, Marcus met me, his face grim. "Elias, we just got the report from the auditors. There is a problem with the Aegis Holdings buyout." I froze. "What do you mean? The money's there. The debt is settled." "The money is there," Marcus said, "but the person who helped you build Aegis, the anonymous angel investor who provided the initial seed capital for your private equity firm, we finally traced the offshore origin. And? It wasn't your grandfather's trust, Elias, at least not all of it. Half of that seed money came from Julian's own father years ago. He was funneling money out of the company to a secret account for the rightful heir. He knew Julian was incompetent. He was betting against his own son to save the company through you. I stared at him. The man who had been my enemy's father had actually been my greatest ally. He had seen the truth about Julian and had secretly funded my rise, knowing I was the only one who could save his legacy from his own blood. "There's one more thing," Marcus whispered. "The building, the Vane Global Tower. There's a hidden safe key mentioned in the senior Vane's will. It's for a vault in the basement, a vault only you can open." I drove back to the tower. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the city. I went to the basement, past the server rooms, to a heavy steel door that required both a physical key and a biometric scan. I turned the key. The door hissed open. Inside wasn't gold or cash. It was a single, small desk, identical to the one I had sat at for 7 years as a nobody. On the desk was a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it. "Elias," it read, "if you are reading this, you have won. But remember, a building is just stone. A company is just paper. A man is defined by what he does when he has all the power and no one to answer to. Julian failed that test. Don't repeat his mistake." But as I turned to leave, I noticed a second folder in the safe, a folder labeled Project Nexus, Real Purpose. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The project Julian stole from me wasn't a business expansion, it was a cover for something much darker. The Nexus project wasn't just Julian's greed, it was a massive data mining operation designed to sell the private information of every citizen in the city to foreign interests. Julian hadn't just been embezzling, he had been a traitor, and because I had bought the company, I was now legally responsible for the project. Julian's final trap wasn't a legal one, it was a moral one. He had left me a poisoned chalice. If I kept the company, I was an accomplice. If I shut it down, I would go bankrupt and lose everything I had fought for. I sat at the small desk in the basement for a long time. The next morning, I called a press conference in the lobby of the Vane Global Tower. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and the former board members. "I am Elias Thorne. I am the owner of this building and this company, and as my first act as CEO, I am dissolving Vane Global." A collective gasp filled the room. The Nexus project was a violation of public trust. I have turned all data over to the federal government, and I am using my personal assets, the entirety of Aegis Holdings, to provide restitution to those Julian Vane harmed. The Vane Global Tower will be donated to the city to be converted into a public school and a center for technological ethics. The reporters went wild. I saw Eleanor in the back, nodding with a tear in her eye. I walked out of the building as the crews were already beginning to take down the Vane sign from the facade. I had no millions. I had no skyscraper. I had a small apartment and a clean conscience. A week later, I was walking through the park when a man in a tattered suit approached me. It was Julian. He was out on bail, awaiting trial, but he had nothing. No lawyers, no family, no friends. He looked like a ghost. "You destroyed everything," he hissed, his eyes wild. "You could have been the king of this city. We could have been partners. Why? Why give it all away?" I stopped and looked at him. I felt no anger, but a quiet, grounded peace. "You called me a nobody, Julian, and you were right. I am a nobody, but a nobody has nothing to prove, and therefore nothing to fear. You were so busy looking down at me that you never noticed the ground was shifting beneath your feet." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the cold. The world will always have its Julians, men who think money equals worth and power equals respect. But for every Julian, there is a quiet man in the corner, taking notes, keeping evidence, and waiting for the moment when the truth finally outweighs the lie. They called me nobody until the judge read my name. Never underestimate the quiet man.